I recently faced my own worst nightmare. The HOA president's kids turned my private pool into their personal splash pad. So, I hired a demolition crew to erase it by dawn. And her excuse? She said that the pool water is public property, sweetheart. But the funny thing is, the only thing that got bulldozed that morning was her ego. Let me start from the beginning. The first thing I heard wasn't the roar of the excavator or the groan of stressed metal. It was a shriek, a sound so high-pitched and full of rage. I was pretty sure somewhere a pack of dogs had just started howling in sympathy. I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring the warmth of the mug in my hands. From my back deck, I had a perfect view of the beautiful, gaping hole in my yard. It was a masterpiece of controlled destruction, a dirt and gravel monument to my own stubbornness. My wife, Chloe, stood beside me, her arm linked through mine. She squeezed it gently, a silent, solid message. I'm with you. Below us, in what used to be our pristine flagstone patio, Brenda Miller, president of the Oak Creek Homeowners Association and empress of all she surveyed, looked like she was about to spontaneously combust. Her face, usually arranged in a mask of condescending pity, was a mess of pure, uncut fury. Her perfectly styled blonde hair was slightly askew, as if she'd run all the way from her house 3 doors down. "What have you done?" she screeched, her voice cracking. The 2-man demolition crew, bless their hearts, just leaned on their shovels, watching the free entertainment. I gave them a little nod. They had earned it. I had paid them extra for the early morning, no warning special. I smiled, a calm, placid smile I had been practicing in the mirror for a week. It was the kind of smile that said, "I have no idea what you're talking about, you hysterical woman." "Good morning, Brenda," I said, my voice deliberately gentle. "Lovely day, isn't it? A bit loud, I know. Sorry about the noise. It'll be over soon." She pointed a trembling, manicured finger at the giant hole where my in-ground pool used to be. Just yesterday, it had been a sparkling blue oasis. Now it was a muddy pit, the last remnants of the vinyl liner sticking out of the dirt like a sad, discarded snakeskin. "My children's pool. You've destroyed my children's summer. You monster." Her children. Right. The 2 little terrors who treated my yard like their own personal water park, leaving a trail of wet towels, half-eaten popsicles, and an overwhelming sense of entitlement in their wake. Her sense of entitlement, to be precise, the one she had apparently passed down like a family heirloom. "I think you're mistaken, Brenda," I said, still smiling. "This is my yard, and that was my pool." Brenda's face spasmed. Then she whipped out her phone like a 6-shooter. 911. "Yes, emergency. He's demolishing community property and endangering children." I took another polite sip of coffee. Chloe's laugh bubbled up beside me, eyes sparkling with mischief. 10 minutes later, a cruiser idled at the curb. Officers Soto and Park ducked under the caution tape. "Morning, folks," Soto said, scanning the permits I already had clipped to a bright orange clipboard. "Everything here's kosher." He turned to Brenda. "Ma'am, did you trespass onto this job site with minors?" Brenda sputtered. "He lured them with heavy machinery." Park raised an eyebrow. "That's not a crime." He handed her a yellow slip. "But filing a false emergency report is a Class B misdemeanor. We'll document this. Next call better be real." Brenda's eyes went wide. First time I'd ever seen fear replace fury. When the cruiser rolled off, she hissed, "This isn't over," and stormed away, stilettos sinking into the churned mud like angry punctuation marks. "It was a community asset," she bellowed, taking a step closer to the yellow caution tape we'd strung up. "It improved property values. It was a place for the neighborhood children to gather." I glanced at Chloe. Her expression was priceless, a perfect blend of amusement and disbelief. The only neighborhood children who ever gathered there were Brenda's, and only because she encouraged them to ignore the 6-foot fence and the locked gate. She'd even had the nerve to fine me for the lock. Unneighborly, the violation notice had said. I thought about framing it. "Well," I said, leaning on the railing, "the community will just have to find value in my new low-maintenance, drought-resistant Zen garden. Very calming. You should try it sometime." Her eyes narrowed to tiny slits. The rage was now simmering, cooling into something much colder and more dangerous. She knew I had her. She knew I had followed every rule in the ridiculously thick HOA covenant book she so loved to hit people with. I had submitted the architectural change request form. I had waited the mandatory 30-day review period. When no one from her hand-picked, rubber-stamping architectural committee had bothered to respond because they assumed it was a joke, their silence, according to Article 7, Section 4, Subsection B, constituted tacit approval. I had the certified mail receipts to prove it. I had a paper trail that could choke a horse. Her horse, preferably. You did this to spite me, she hissed. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. And for the first time that morning, she was 100% correct. I just shrugged. I did this because I wanted a Zen garden, and because I was tired of cleaning wet socks and sticky juice boxes out of my skimmer basket. Her whole body went rigid. I could see the wheels turning in her head, searching for an angle, a loophole, a new way to make my life miserable. She was a shark that had just been cheated out of a meal, and now she was circling, looking for any drop of blood in the water. She pulled out her phone, her thumb jabbing at the screen with venomous intent. You think this is over? She snarled, holding the phone up to her ear. You have just started a war you cannot possibly win, you pathetic little man. The threat hung in the air, heavy and ugly. I watched as she turned and stomped away, her phone pressed to her ear, no doubt calling her lawyer, the city, the National Guard, and anyone else who would listen to her tale of woe. Chloe squeezed my arm again, this time a little tighter. Well, she murmured, her voice a low hum of satisfaction. That went about as well as I expected. I nodded, but my eyes were still on Brenda's retreating back. She wasn't just angry, she was plotting. This wasn't the end of the battle over the hole in my backyard. This was just the beginning. It all started so innocently. A dream, really, the American dream, suburban edition. My wife, Chloe, and I had saved for years. We worked hard, lived below our means, and finally scraped together enough to buy our forever home in what we thought was a quiet, peaceful neighborhood. The house was perfect, but the backyard was the real prize. It was big, flat, and sun-drenched. The moment I saw it, I had a vision. A crystal clear picture of a sparkling blue pool, of summer barbecues, of our future kids learning to swim. It was a vision of happiness, of a life well lived. For the first year, it was exactly that. I spent every weekend digging that hole myself. A shovel and a wheelbarrow, my only companions. It was backbreaking work, but I loved it. Every shovelful of dirt was a step closer to the dream. Chloe would bring me lemonade and tell me I was crazy, but she had that look in her eye, too. She saw it. She saw the future we were building. Then Brenda Miller was elected HOA president. At first, we didn't think much of it. We'd met her a few times. She seemed intense, but we were busy with the pool installation, getting the liner in, setting up the pump. We were in our own little world. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a crisp, white envelope in our mailbox. A friendly reminder. It said, a reminder that all major landscaping projects, including pools, required architectural committee approval. We were already halfway done. I panicked. I called her immediately, apologized profusely, and explained we were new and didn't realize the full extent of the rules. She was sickly sweet on the phone. Oh, it's no trouble at all, dear, she cooed. Just a formality. Submit the paperwork and we'll approve it retroactively. We're all neighbors here, after all. So I did. I submitted the plans, the specs, the material lists, and a week later, we got the approval. I was relieved. I thought, see, she's reasonable. I was so naive. I was a baby deer frolicking in a meadow, completely unaware of the hunter in the trees. The pool was finished in late spring, and it was glorious. It was everything we had dreamed of. For about 2 weeks, we had paradise. Then school let out for the summer, and Brenda's 2 boys, who were like miniature, sun-bleached copies of their mother, discovered the gap in the fence between our properties. A picket that had been deliberately loosened, I would later realize. The first time, I was neighborly. Hey kids, I said, walking out with a smile. You gotta ask before you come over, okay? This is private property. They just stared at me with blank eyes, and then did a cannonball, splashing chlorinated water all over my freshly pressed work shirt. I went to Brenda. I was polite, calm. Brenda, I said, I love that your kids enjoy the pool, but for safety reasons, we really need them to ask first. And maybe you could come with them? She gave me that patronizing smile. Oh, don't be such a stick in the mud. They're just boys being boys. We have to foster a sense of community. The next week, the first official violation notice arrived. Fine, $50. Reason, unsecured swimming facility. I bought a new heavy-duty lock for the gate. The following weekend, while we were out, her kids just climbed the fence. I came home to a yard littered with muddy footprints and floating snack wrappers. The next violation notice was for $100. Reason, nuisance gate locking, impeding community access to shared amenities. I called her, my temper starting to fray. Brenda, It is not a shared amenity. It's my pool. I paid for it. I clean it. My insurance covers it. She just laughed, a sound like ice cubes in a blender. The bylaws are very clear, she said. Any feature visible from another property that enhances community appeal can be considered an asset. You should be thanking me for the free security. My boys keep an eye on the place for you. This was when I knew I wasn't dealing with a reasonable person. I was dealing with a tyrant who wore pastel-colored tracksuits. That weekend proved she'd only been warming up. Saturday at 3 p.m., we rolled back from Costco to find a dozen folding chairs, 2 inflatable unicorn floaties, and an entire sheet cake. Welcome Oak Creek Splash Bash, set up on our lawn. Brenda stood at the gate, ushering neighborhood kids through the gap in the fence while parents mingled, looking confused but too polite to argue with the HOA president who'd promised them community swim time. Chloe killed the engine, jaw slack. Tell me I'm hallucinating, she whispered. I've tried, I answered. Doesn't work. I marched over. Party's over. Everyone out of the pool. Brenda didn't even turn. She just snapped her fingers and stage whispered, "Photos, Cody." Get him yelling. Her oldest produced a phone, filming my irritation like it was a nature documentary. The guests, mostly reluctant parents, started to gather towels. A few offered tight apologies. Brenda clicked her tongue at them as if they had ruined a civic event. On cue, Dolores and Walter, her rubber stamp board, strode up in matching polo shirts, unfurling a vinyl banner that read, HOA Community Aquatics Initiative. Walter announced in a voice that was 90% bass and 10% threat that the board had provisionally approved open swim hours at all accessible water features until further notice. Dolores waved a laminated schedule. Chloe joined me, cheeks flaming. Provisional approval requires 5 days posted notice and a 2/3 homeowner quorum, she shot back. Her tone was calm, but carried the crackle of impending lightning. Brenda's smile thinned. We mailed the notice yesterday. Certified? Chloe asked. Well, first class, Dolores mumbled. I had the crowd now. Anyone here get that letter? Heads shook. A dad still holding a paper plate of sheet cake muttered. First I've heard. The spell broke. Parents hustled their kids out. The unicorns bobbed alone. Brenda pivoted, eyes like daggers. You're anti-community, Mark. These families wanted to cool off. My insurance company wants them dry, I said, cutting the banner's rope with my car keys. The vinyl sagged like a deflated ego. Chloe snapped a photo time stamp. Faces, the work's evidence for our growing dossier. Brenda gathered her brood in banners. But as she left, she hissed a promise only we could hear. Paperwork cuts deeper than knives. She was gone in a swish of pastel polyester and entitlement, leaving melted ice cream and trampled grass. Chloe exhaled. One day she'll choke on her own red tape. Not if we wrap her in it first, I said. The war escalated. I installed a camera. She sent me a notice that my camera was violating her family's privacy. I sent her a bill for cleaning services. She sent me a fine for improper disposal of chemically treated water after I had the audacity to backwash the filter. Then came the final straw, the one that turned me from a frustrated homeowner into a man with a mission. It was a $250 fine. I opened the envelope expecting more nonsense, but this one was special. The reason listed was, and I am not making this up, failure to promote aquatic fellowship. She had fined me for my pool being lonely. Chloe saw the look on my face. She read the letter over my shoulder, and her jaw tightened. That's it, she said, her voice low and dangerous. This woman needs to be taught a lesson. I looked at the violation, then at the thick binder of HOA rules sitting on our counter, the one Brenda had so happily provided to us when we moved in. A crazy, beautiful, terrible idea began to form in my mind. A plan so petty, so by the book, and so utterly final that it just might work. Brenda Miller wanted to play by the rules. Fine. I would read every single page. I would learn her own sacred text better than she did. She had started a war, all right, but she had no idea who she was fighting. She thought I was just some guy with a pool. She was about to find out how wrong she was. The day after I received the aquatic fellowship fine was the day the game changed. It was no longer a spat between neighbors. It was a strategic operation. Chloe and I sat at our kitchen table, the ridiculous violation notice sitting between us like a declaration of war. My first instinct was to storm over to Brenda's house and have it out with her. But Chloe, my brilliant, headstrong Chloe, put a hand on my arm. No, she said, yelling won't work. She feeds on that. We can't fight her on her terms. We have to fight her on ours. And she was right. Brenda Miller's power came from emotional manipulation. She made people angry. And when they got angry, they got sloppy. We couldn't afford to be sloppy, so we did the last thing she would ever expect. We paid the fine. We sent a check for $250 with a polite, deferential note. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. We will endeavor to be more communally minded in the future. I'm pretty sure the sheer, unadulterated smugness radiating from Brenda's house could have powered a small city for a week. She thought she had won. She thought she had broken us. And that was exactly what we wanted her to think. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the dining room table with a highlighter, a pot of coffee, and the HOA covenant, a document thicker than most novels and about 100 times more boring. I read every word. I read about lawn maintenance, mailbox colors, and the approved species of seasonal flowers. I read about noise ordinances and satellite dish placement. I read until my eyes burned and the words started to swim together. Chloe came out around 2 o'clock in the morning and put a fresh cup of coffee in front of me. Find anything? She asked. I shook my head, frustrated. It's an ironclad fortress of misery, I muttered. Every rule is designed to give the president maximum power and the homeowner maximum grief. Keep reading, she said, kissing the top of my head. There's always a crack. You just have to find it. And then, around 4 in the morning, buried deep in the section on landscaping and architectural modifications, I found it. Article 7, Section 4, Subsection B. It was a dense, jargon-filled paragraph about the approval process for property changes. It stated that all requests must be submitted on the official form, and the Architectural Committee had 30 days to respond in writing. If no written response was received within that 30-day window, the request was to be considered passively approved. It was a standard clause, a legal failsafe to prevent a committee from just sitting on a request forever. But in the hands of a committee run by Brenda Miller, a committee made up of her closest friends who likely just did whatever she told them, it wasn't a failsafe. It was a loophole. A beautiful, glorious loophole. I felt a jolt, a surge of adrenaline that was better than any coffee. I had it. I had the key. But that wasn't the inciting incident. The real push, the thing that solidified my resolve from simple revenge into a holy crusade, happened 3 days later. I was in my home office when I heard a splash, followed by a child's cry. My blood ran cold. I sprinted to the back door and saw one of Brenda's kids, the younger one, climbing out of the pool, crying his eyes out. He'd slipped on the wet concrete and scraped his knee. It wasn't a bad scrape, more of a shock than a real injury, but he was wailing like he'd lost a limb. I ran out, helped him up, checked him over. He was fine. I was just about to walk him home when Brenda came storming into my yard. Not through the gate, but through the gap in the fence, her face a mask of theatrical fury. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't check on her son. She just pointed her finger at me. You, she shrieked. Your unsafe, hazardous pool has injured my child. I'm calling my lawyer. I'm calling the police. I will own this house. I will see you ruined. That was it. That was the moment. She wasn't just a bully anymore. She was a predator. She was willing to use her own child's minor scrape as a weapon to destroy us, to take our home. All because I wanted to have a private pool in my own backyard. The protective instinct that roars inside every husband, every father, every man who has something precious to defend just exploded inside me. The witty, sarcastic part of me went silent. The gritty, determined part took over. I stood up, looked her dead in the eye, and for the first time, I didn't try to placate her. My voice was dangerously quiet. Get off my property, Brenda. Now. She was so shocked, she actually took a step back. She grabbed her son's hand, who had stopped crying and was now just staring, and dragged him away, still sputtering threats. As I watched her go, I knew the pool had to go. It wasn't just a nuisance anymore. It was a liability. It was the weapon she was trying to use against my family, and I would not let that happen. My plan was no longer about petty revenge. It was about scorched earth defense. I wasn't just going to remove the problem. I was going to rip it out by the roots and salt the earth behind it, all by using her own stupid rule book. The war had been declared, and she had just handed me all the ammunition I would ever need. The plan was codenamed Operation Zen Garden. It was beautiful in its simplicity and diabolical in its execution. The day after Brenda's theatrical threat to sue me into oblivion, I sat down and drafted the most boring, mind-numbing, and technically compliant document of my life. Architectural Change Request Form 11B. Under description of proposed change, I didn't write, ripping out the pool that our HOA president is obsessed with. I wrote, regrading of posterior land parcel to facilitate the installation of a low-water, eco-friendly xeriscape featuring natural stone and gravel elements in accordance with community aesthetic guidelines. I even attached a list of the approved Pantone color codes for the rocks I planned to use. It was a masterpiece of corporate jargon. It was so utterly dull that no one in their right mind would ever want to read it twice. Chloe played her part perfectly. She accidentally ran into one of Brenda's cronies from the architectural committee at the grocery store. With a defeated sigh, she confessed that we were just so tired of the conflict and that I was planning to build a small retaining wall near the pool to improve safety. A little white lie to plant a seed, to make them think my request was something small and insignificant. A retaining wall. That's what they'd be expecting. Let them expect it. The less they paid attention, the better. I mailed the official request via certified mail with return receipt requested. The little green card that came back a few days later, signed by Brenda's own hand, was the first nail in her coffin. The 30-day countdown had begun. During that month, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Brenda was on a power trip. She'd walk her dog past my house, deliberately slowing down to stare at our front yard. She was looking for any infraction. One afternoon, our neighbor Jim, a retired mechanic with a love for conspiracy theories and a heart of gold, called me in a panic. "Mark, you better get out here. She's got a tape measure." I walked outside to see Brenda Miller on her hands and knees in my lawn, measuring the height of my grass. My grass. According to her, it was 1/4 of an inch over the legal limit. She wrote me a $25 ticket for excessive turf height. I paid it without a word. Another time, she left a note on our door claiming our garden gnome, a gag gift from Chloe's mother, was aesthetically displeasing. We moved the gnome to the backyard. We gave her nothing to latch onto. We were perfect, rule-abiding citizens, and it was driving her insane. Neighbor Jim became my unofficial lookout. He was a funny guy, lived alone, and had decided that the HOA drama was the best reality show on television. He'd sit on his porch, hidden behind a large fern, and give me updates. "She's on the move, Eagle 1, he'd whisper into his phone. "Target is approaching your mailbox. Looks hostile." I repeat, looks hostile. He was a welcome dose of comedy in a stressful situation. He'd lived in the neighborhood for 30 years and had seen presidents come and go. "This one's different," he told me one evening over the fence. "She's not just a busybody. She's mean. She gets a thrill out of it. Be careful, son. She's a snake in the petunias." The 30 days passed like a prison sentence. On day 31, I checked the mail, my heart pounding. Nothing. No certified letter, no rejection, no request for more information. Nothing. Her arrogance had been her undoing. She and her committee hadn't even bothered to formally acknowledge my request, let alone deny it. They had dismissed it, just as we had predicted. According to her own rules, my Zen garden was approved. That night, I made the calls. I lined up the demolition crew. I hired a landscaping company. I arranged for the gravel and the boulders to be delivered. Everything was set for T-Day, Troll Day. The evening before the demolition, there was a strange, tense quiet in the neighborhood. It was the calm before the storm. Chloe and I were sitting on the deck, looking at the pool one last time. It was beautiful, shimmering under the twilight sky. For a second, I felt a pang of sadness. This had been our dream. Are we doing the right thing? I asked her, my voice quiet. She took my hand. Her grip was firm, her resolve unshaken. "We dreamed of a place of peace," she said, her eyes meeting mine. "A place for our family to be happy and safe. That pool isn't that place anymore. She turned it into a battlefield. Tomorrow, we take our land back." Her strength was my strength. She was right. This wasn't about destroying a dream. It was about reclaiming it. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the water, I felt a cold sense of purpose settle over me. The tension wasn't just in the air anymore. It was inside me, a coiled spring ready to be released. Tomorrow morning, Brenda Miller was going to get the surprise of her life. And I had a feeling the surprises weren't going to end with a missing pool. The morning of the demolition was electric. The crew rolled in at 7:01 a.m., 1 legal minute past the city's noise curfew. The big yellow excavator rolled off the flatbed with a satisfying clank of its treads on the asphalt. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The plan was in motion. But this is where the story takes a turn. This is where it stopped being a simple story about a guy getting revenge on his HOA president and became something else. The excavator operator was a pro. He carefully broke up the concrete decking, piling it neatly to be hauled away. Then he started on the pool itself. He punched the bucket through the vinyl liner and began scooping out the sand and dirt base from underneath. It was messy, loud, and absolutely glorious. Chloe and I watched from the deck, coffee in hand, like we were watching the world's most satisfying home renovation show. Neighbor Jim was on his porch, giving us a thumbs up from behind his fern. About 3 feet down, under the deep end of the pool, the excavator's bucket hit something with a dull, metallic thud. Not a rock. It was a flat, hollow sound. The operator, a burly guy named Hank, stopped immediately. He climbed out of the cab and peered into the hole. "Boss," he called up to me. "You might want to see this." I went down into the muddy pit. There, half buried in the damp earth, was a dark green metal box. It looked like an old military footlocker. It was about 3 feet long, 2 feet wide, and sealed shut with 2 heavy-duty latches that were rusted solid. It wasn't ours. I'd dug most of this hole myself, and I'd had the final excavation done by a professional crew. We had seen nothing but dirt and clay. This had to have been buried before the pool was put in, but the pool was brand new, which meant this box was put here before we even bought the house. My first thought was a paranoid one. Did Brenda bury this here? It seemed insane. But then again, so was finding me for pool loneliness. Hank looked at me, his expression serious. Could be anything in there, man. Old tools, or, not old tools. He let the implication hang in the air. A buried box is never a good sign. My mind raced. What do I do? If I call the police, my whole project gets shut down. It becomes a potential crime scene. The demolition stops. The investigation starts, and Brenda Miller wins. She gets to keep the pool, in a manner of speaking, because my plan to remove it would be dead in the water. I'd be tied up in red tape for months, maybe years. "Let's get it out of the hole," I said, my voice sounding much calmer than I felt. Carefully, Hank and his partner managed to get straps around the box and used the excavator's arm to lift it gently out of the pit and onto the patio. It was heavy, really heavy. Up close, I could see it was old. The paint was peeling, and the rust on the latches was thick. There was no writing on it, no markings of any kind. It was completely anonymous. Hank wiped his hands on his jeans. "So what's the play, boss? You want us to keep digging, or do you want to call someone?" This was the moment, the crossroads. I looked at the box, then at the hole, then at my house where Chloe was watching with a worried expression. My entire plan, my meticulously crafted, by-the-book revenge, was now being threatened by a mysterious metal box. The easy thing, the right thing, would be to stop everything and report it. But my gritty, protective, and deeply sarcastic gut told me that would be a huge mistake. This box felt connected to the whole mess. I didn't know how, but I could feel it. Brenda's obsession with my property, her frantic need to control what happened in my backyard. What if it wasn't about the pool at all? What if it was about this? "Keep digging," I told Hank, my decision made. "Work around that spot. I'll deal with the box." He just nodded, a silent understanding passing between us. He was being paid for a job, and he could see I was a man with a purpose. As the excavator roared back to life, I stood there staring at the locked metal chest sitting in the middle of my yard. I had just made a choice to conceal a potential piece of evidence, to take a huge risk, all to win a fight with my HOA president. It was a line I never thought I'd cross. I had opened Pandora's well. I hadn't opened it yet, but I had a very bad feeling that whatever was inside was going to change everything. And I knew with absolute certainty that Brenda Miller could never find out it existed. The excavator continued its work, but my focus was entirely on the mysterious green box. I had the crew move it into my garage before they left for the day, tucking it away under a dusty tarp. Out of sight, but definitely not out of mind. That evening, after the noise and the dust had settled, the garage was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. Chloe and I stood before the shrouded box like it was a sacred relic. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. This was my moral crossroads. I was a guy who followed the rules. I paid my taxes. I stopped at stop signs, even in the middle of the night. But Brenda Miller had pushed me, and now a rusty green box was asking me just how far I was willing to go to defend my home and my sanity. Was I the kind of man who would break the law to win? "We're going to open it," I said, the words feeling strange in my own mouth. "If we call the cops, we lose. Our project gets shut down, the yard stays a wreck, and Brenda will use the delay to find some new way to torture us. Whatever is in this box, it was buried in our yard before we ever got here. I have a right to know what it is." I wasn't sure if that was legally true, but it was the justification I was clinging to. Chloe hesitated for only a second. Then she gave me a firm nod. "Okay," she said. "But we do this together, and we do it carefully." So began the second phase of Operation Zen Garden, The unboxing. The latches were rusted shut, fused together by years of moisture and time. A crowbar would be too loud, and I didn't want to damage the contents. I went to my workshop and came back with a can of penetrating oil and a small wire brush. For the next hour, I meticulously cleaned the rust away, spraying the oil into the mechanism, tapping it gently with a small hammer. It was delicate work, like diffusing a bomb. For all I knew, it could be. Finally, with a painful, groaning screech, the first latch gave way. Then the second. My heart was hammering against my ribs. Chloe held a heavy-duty flashlight. Its beam focused on the lid. I took a deep breath, looked at her, and lifted the heavy lid. The air that escaped was stale and musty, the smell of old paper and forgotten time. We both leaned in, peering into the darkness. It wasn't a body. It wasn't a pile of cash. It was files. The box was filled to the brim with manila folders, ledgers, and stacks of paper bound with rubber bands that had long since grown brittle and snapped. I reached in and pulled out the top folder. The label on it was handwritten in faded blue ink. Oak Creek HOA. Land Acquisition Files, 2008. I opened it. Inside were contracts, surveyor maps, and correspondence between the original property developer and the very first HOA board. We spent the rest of the night on the garage floor, a portable heater warding off the chill, piecing together a history that someone had clearly wanted to bury forever. It was a sordid tale of greed and corruption. The documents laid it all out. The developer had given the early HOA board members, the very first homeowners in the subdivision, a sweetheart deal. He'd sold them their prime lots for pennies on the dollar. In exchange, they had to sign off on shoddy construction materials, overlook zoning violations, and approve changes that saved the developer millions. It was all there in black and white. Canceled checks, signed agreements, meeting minutes that were never officially published. And then we found the signature on document after document. The HOA treasurer from back then was a name that made the hair on my arms stand up. Richard Miller, Brenda's husband. He had been the architect of the whole crooked scheme. He was the one funneling the developer's donations into an unaudited community improvement fund that seemed to exist only in his ledger. And on several of the most damning documents, right next to his signature, was the signature of the witness, the HOA secretary at the time, Brenda Miller. My fight with her, her obsession, her rage, it all started to click into place. It wasn't just about a pool. It was never about a pool. She wasn't just a power-hungry bully. She was a criminal, desperately protecting a dark secret that was buried, quite literally, in my backyard. She was terrified that any major digging, any official scrutiny of my property, might unearth the very evidence that could destroy her and her husband. I felt a grim sense of satisfaction, but it was quickly replaced by a cold dread. This was bigger than a neighborhood dispute. Now, this was fraud. This was conspiracy. We were holding evidence of serious crimes. My moral crossroads had led me down a path I never could have imagined. I had started this whole thing to get a woman to stop bothering me. Now, I was sitting on a box of secrets that could send her to prison. The question that hung in the stale garage air was no longer just about how to win my little war. The question now was, what in the world was I going to do with this dynamite? I looked at Chloe, her face pale in the harsh light of the flashlight, and I knew one thing for sure. There was no going back. We were in this all the way to the end. We thought we had found the ultimate weapon. The box of documents was the smoking gun, the key to ending Brenda Miller's reign of terror once and for all. We spent the next 2 days in a state of controlled paranoia, poring over the files, scanning every page onto a secure hard drive. The evidence was damning. Bid rigging for landscaping contracts, kickbacks from the paving company, the whole sordid history of the Oak Creek HOA was laid bare in that rusty green box. It explained everything: her desperate need for control, her position as the untouchable president, her willingness to crush anyone who challenged her authority. She wasn't just on a power trip. She was standing guard over a buried secret. My plan had been to slowly leak the information, turn the neighborhood against her, and watch her empire crumble. It was going to be a slow, delicious, and deeply satisfying victory. But the box had one last secret to give up, and this one changed the game completely. Tucked into the very bottom, beneath a thick ledger from 2009, was a single folded piece of paper. It was a different kind of paper, thicker, with an official-looking watermark. It wasn't a contract or a meeting minute. It was a map, a preliminary plat map of the subdivision, dated before any of the houses were built. Scrawled on it were notes in Richard Miller's handwriting. Most of it was boring surveyor stuff, but one section was circled in red ink. It was my lot, Lot 42. And next to it, Richard had written a note, common area designation to be lost in final filing. Per agreement with city planning clerk. Bonus payment pending. I read it again and again. Chloe looked at me, her brow furrowed. What is it? She asked. I couldn't speak for a moment. I just pointed at the note. Her eyes scanned the words, and I saw the color drain from her face. Common area, she whispered. What does that mean? I stood up and started pacing the garage, my mind reeling. It means this land, the ground my house is sitting on, was never supposed to be a private lot for sale. It was supposed to be a park or a green space or maybe a community pool area for the whole neighborhood. The implications hit us like a physical blow. Brenda and her husband hadn't just skimmed some money off the top. They had conspired with a corrupt city official to illegally rezone and sell a piece of common land. They had stolen the land from the community and sold it for a profit, which I had then bought in good faith years later. This was the real secret. This was the dark heart of the whole affair. This was the twist that turned everything upside down. The evidence of financial fraud was one thing, but this called into question the very legality of my property, my deed, my title, the piece of paper that said this house and this land were mine. It could all be based on an original act of fraud. If this ever came out, I might not even own my house. I could lose everything. The irony was so thick I could choke on it. In my quest to protect my property from Brenda Miller, I had discovered that my property might not even be legally mine. Her insane, irrational fight to control my backyard suddenly made perfect, terrifying sense. She wasn't trying to gain access to my pool. She was desperately trying to prevent anyone from digging deep enough, literally or figuratively, to uncover the original sin that had built her little kingdom. My pool project was her worst nightmare come to life. Suddenly, my clever plan seemed reckless and stupid. If I exposed her, I could be exposing myself to a legal nightmare. I'd be the one inviting the lawyers and the city inspectors in, the very people who might declare my title null and void. She had me in a trap, and I had walked right into it, and then dug it deeper myself. I looked at the piles of documents, the evidence that was supposed to be my triumph. Now it felt like a curse. She knew, I said quietly, the realization dawning on me. Every fine, every threat. She wasn't trying to win a fight. She was trying to scare us away. She wanted us to sell the house and leave so her secret would stay safe. All this time, I thought I was the one playing chess. But she had been playing a completely different game, one with stakes I couldn't have even imagined. Chloe sank onto a stool, her face in her hands. So what do? She said, her voice muffled. We can't use this. If we do, we could lose our home. But we can't just let her get away with it. We were trapped. We held the weapon that could destroy our enemy, but firing it would mean pointing it directly at ourselves. For the first time since the ordeal began, I felt a flicker of despair. Brenda Miller, from her position of deceit and corruption, had managed to checkmate me. Any move I made, I would lose. But then I looked at Chloe. I looked at the garage, at the house we had worked so hard for. And that gritty, protective part of me, the part that had started this whole thing, roared back to life. No, I would not lose. I would not let that vile woman win. She had built her castle on a foundation of lies. I just had to find a way to tear it down without my own house collapsing in the process. The plan had to change. It was no longer about a simple victory. It was about survival. The discovery that my own property was built on a foundation of fraud sent a chill down my spine. But that chill quickly hardened into icy resolve. I was done playing defense. I was done being clever. It was time to be smart. For 2 days, Chloe and I were a whirlwind of activity. We didn't talk to anyone. We barely slept. We became legal researchers, forensic accountants, and strategic planners. The enemy had a weakness. Her crimes were numerous and tangled together. Our challenge was to isolate one part of her corruption, the part we could attack without blowing ourselves up in the process. The land title issue was the nuclear option. We had to put that aside for now. It was our ace in the hole, but playing it could cost us the game. Instead, we focused on the more straightforward financial crimes, the bid rigging, the kickbacks, the slush fund. The evidence was overwhelming. The new plan was simple. We were going to stage a coup. A legal, by-the-book, community-led coup. Step 1 was to find allies. I knew I couldn't be the only person Brenda had terrorized. I started by talking to neighbor Jim. I went over one evening, not with a beer, but with a single, carefully chosen document, a copy of a landscaping contract from 5 years ago, showing a company had been paid $50,000 to plant 6 trees. 6. I also brought a current quote I'd gotten from a reputable nursery for the same work, $5,000. Jim looked at the 2 papers, his folksy demeanor dropping away to reveal a sharp, intelligent mind. He let out a long, low whistle. 45 grand, he said, shaking his head. And I know for a fact her brother-in-law owns that landscaping company. He looked at me, his eyes serious. What else you got, son? That was all it took. Jim knew everyone. He became my quiet ambassador. He knew the widow on the corner whom Brenda had fined into bankruptcy over a fence that was the wrong shade of white. He knew the young couple who had been forced to rip out a beautiful patio because Brenda's friend on the committee wanted their view unobstructed. One by one, Jim brought them to us, always after dark, meeting in our garage like a band of suburban revolutionaries. We showed each of them the evidence that pertained to their own grievance, proving that Brenda's actions weren't random acts of cruelty, but part of a larger corrupt pattern. We didn't show them the land title documents. That was our secret. We just showed them enough to prove she was a thief. The fear that had kept them silent for so long began to burn away, replaced by a cold, hard anger. We had them. We had an army. The final piece of the puzzle was the most dangerous. According to the bylaws, we could call an emergency meeting of the homeowners if we had a petition signed by 25% of the residents. We needed to get those signatures without tipping Brenda off. We had one shot at this. We drafted the petition. It was vague, citing only a need to discuss grave financial mismanagement by the board and a call for a vote of no confidence. Over the course of a single night, our little group spread out across the neighborhood. We went door to door, speaking in hushed tones, showing our carefully curated evidence. It was a risk. If anyone talked, Brenda would have time to prepare, to shred evidence, to get her lawyers ready. But her reign of terror had been so absolute that people were more afraid of her staying in power than they were of signing. By sunrise, we had signatures from nearly half the neighborhood. I hand-delivered the petition and the notice of the emergency meeting to Brenda's house myself. I didn't ring the bell. I used the mail slot, just like she always did with her violation notices. The meeting was set for the following evening in the community clubhouse. We gave her less than 24 hours to react. It was just enough time for her to panic, but not enough time for her to mount a proper defense. The rest of the day was a blur of preparation. Chloe and I made dozens of copies of the most damning financial records. We prepared a simple, clear presentation. I called a lawyer I knew, a friend from college, and asked him to be there not to speak, but just to be a presence, a silent reminder that this was serious. As evening approached, a storm was rolling in, the sky turning a dark, bruised purple. It felt appropriate. The air was heavy, charged with anticipation. The clubhouse, a sterile room usually reserved for potlucks and holiday parties, was packed. More than 100 people crammed into the space, their faces a mixture of anger, fear, and curiosity. My allies were scattered through the crowd, a network of quiet support. Chloe stood by the door, a grim-faced guardian. Neighbor Jim gave me a solid pat on the back as I walked to the front of the room. "Give him hell, son," he muttered. Then, exactly at 7 o'clock, the door swung open. Brenda Miller strode in, flanked by her 2 loyal cronies from the board. She was dressed in a severe black pantsuit, her face a mask of cold fury. She surveyed the crowd, her eyes promising retribution for every person who had dared to show up. She thought this was a rebellion. She had no idea it was an execution. The showdown was about to begin. The room fell silent as Brenda marched to the front, her heels clicking sharply on the linoleum floor. She stood beside me, radiating an aura of pure, undiluted menace. She tried to take the microphone from the little lectern, but I put my hand on it. "According to the bylaws," I said, my voice amplified slightly by the cheap speaker system, "the homeowners who call an emergency meeting are the ones who set the agenda." I looked directly at her. "So please, have a seat." For a split second, I saw a flicker of shock in her eyes. She was used to being in charge. But in front of this many witnesses, she couldn't just bully her way through. With a look that could curdle milk, she sat down in the front row, crossing her arms. The battle for control of the room was the first victory of the night. I took a deep breath. My heart was pounding, but my voice was steady. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my eyes scanning the crowd of familiar and unfamiliar faces. "My name is Mark. My wife, Chloe, and I live at 124 Willow Lane. For the last year, many of us have lived under a cloud of intimidation, arbitrary fines, and harassment. We've been told it's for the good of the community. We've been told it's to maintain property values. Tonight, I'm here to tell you that it's all been a lie." A murmur went through the crowd. Brenda just smirked, as if this was all the pathetic whining of a disgruntled rule breaker. She had no idea what was coming. "The lie," I continued, my voice getting stronger, "is that our HOA has been run for our benefit. The truth is that the Oak Creek HOA has been run like a private piggy bank for our president, Brenda Miller, and her family." Brenda shot to her feet. "That is a slanderous accusation. This meeting is over. You will be hearing from my lawyer." The lawyer I had brought, a calm, imposing man in a sharp suit, simply cleared his throat. It was a small sound, but it cut through the room. Brenda's eyes darted to him, then back to me. She stayed standing, but she didn't move. "Please, Brenda, I have proof," I said calmly, "and I think your neighbors would like to see it." This was the cue. Chloe and Jim and my other allies started passing out the files. A rustle of paper filled the room as dozens of homeowners began reading the evidence of the crimes committed against them. I saw a woman gasp as she saw the invoice for the 6 trees. I saw a man's face darken with rage as he saw the proof that the paving company that charged double the market rate was owned by Brenda's cousin. I walked them through it, piece by piece. The kickbacks, the fake invoices, the community improvement fund that had paid for her new deck and a family vacation to Hawaii, all disguised as clubhouse repairs. With every new revelation, the mood in the room shifted. The fear was burning away, replaced by a collective, righteous fury. "Thief!" someone shouted from the back. "I knew it," another one yelled. Brenda was on her feet, screaming denials, but her voice was drowned out by the rising anger of the people she had cheated. Her face was pale, the mask of control completely shattered. She looked cornered, desperate. And a desperate Brenda is a dangerous Brenda. "You can't prove any of this," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Everyone knows you're violent. Even the police said." I cut her off. "Officer Soto isn't here tonight, Brenda, but his body cam footage is." The moment Officer Park slid that yellow notice of false emergency report into her hand, while Soto's body cam rolled, gasps rippled through the room. Her last shred of credibility evaporated. "These documents are fake. You dug up your yard and faked these documents to get back at me for the pool." He's a liar. It was a wild, desperate gambit, and it might have worked if she hadn't given me the perfect opening. "You're right about one thing, Brenda," I said, my voice dropping, pulling the focus of the entire room back to me. "I did dig up my yard, and I did find some things. But I didn't find just these financial records. I found something else. Something about my property. Lot 42. The moment I said it, her blood ran cold. I saw it. The last bit of color drained from her face. Her eyes went wide with sheer terror. She knew exactly what I was talking about. The room fell silent again, sensing the kill shot was coming. "I know what you did, Brenda," I said, my voice low and clear. "I know you and Richard falsified city records. I know my house is built on stolen land, land that belongs to everyone in this room." A collective gasp went through the crowd. This was something they all understood instantly. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about a fundamental betrayal. Brenda opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She just stared at me, her mind clearly racing, trying to find a way out of a trap that had just snapped shut on her. The storm outside broke. A loud crack of thunder rattled the windows of the clubhouse. And in that moment, under the flickering fluorescent lights, surrounded by the neighbors she had tormented for years, Brenda Miller finally looked like what she was, a defeated criminal. The fight was over. All that was left was the fallout. In the stunned silence that followed my final revelation, a single voice cut through the tension. It was the quiet widow from the corner, a woman Brenda had personally hounded for months. "I make a motion," she said, her voice shaking but clear, "for an immediate vote of no confidence and the removal of Brenda Miller as president of this board." Neighbor Jim, standing near the back, bellowed, "I second the motion." It was a cascade. Hands shot up all over the room, a forest of righteous anger. The vote was unanimous, save for Brenda and her 2 now very nervous-looking cronies. She was out. Just like that, her reign was over. It was in that moment, as she stared at the sea of hands raised against her, that her composure finally and completely broke. She let out a guttural sob of rage and defeat, turned, and fled the clubhouse, pushing through the crowd and disappearing into the rainy night. The aftermath was swift and decisive. With the evidence we provided, the newly elected interim board didn't just remove her, they pursued legal action. The district attorney, armed with our meticulously organized files, launched a full investigation. Brenda and her husband were charged with multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The illegal land deal became the cornerstone of the prosecution's case. Faced with a mountain of evidence and a line of angry homeowners ready to testify, they both took a plea deal. They avoided a long prison sentence, but they were forced to pay massive restitution to the HOA, effectively draining the accounts they had spent years illegally filling. They were ruined financially and socially. Last I heard, they sold their house at a loss and moved 2 states away, leaving behind a legacy of disgrace. The HOA had to hire a team of lawyers to untangle the mess of my property title. But because I had been a victim of the Millers' fraud, the community and the city worked with me. My title was cleared and reissued, this time legally and without a shadow of corruption hanging over it. The community itself changed. The fear was gone, replaced by a new sense of unity. People started talking to each other again. We had a real community barbecue, the first in years, held right next to my now completed Zen garden. The garden, with its simple raked gravel and 3 stark boulders, became a quiet symbol of our victory. It was a place of peace born from a battlefield. Chloe and I finally have the quiet life we always wanted. We sit on our deck, and there are no shrieks, no violation notices, no sense of being watched. There is only the gentle sound of the wind and the knowledge that we fought for our home and we won. I learned something through all this. I learned that a person's home is their fortress. And when that fortress is attacked, you have to be willing to fight back with everything you've got. You have to be willing to read the fine print, to get your hands dirty, and sometimes, to take a risk for what is right. Brenda Miller asked how far I would go to defend my own. The answer is all the way.